briefly, we look into data protection before we move to data life cycles. So data protection, of course, it's central in research for research ethics and human rights, and very important in terms of being the autonomy, independence, and human dignity, protecting the data subjects, their dignity, and it's an ethical and legal obligation for researchers to protect participants through data life cycle. So data protection is the process of safeguarding important information from corruption, from compromise or loss, and providing the capability to restore the data to a functional state and should it be rendered inaccessible or unusable. Data availability, when needed and usable for its intended purposes, it's one of the key role for data protection. So we protect it to ensure that it's available and it can be used for intended purposes, preservation, deletion, and destruction. So just to make it available, that is one of the important aspects of data protection. Data protection spans three broad categories. We have the traditional data protection, that is backup, restoring the copies and preventing the loss, the damages. And then the issues to do with data security, protects the integrity of data itself against manipulations, malware attacks, the phishing attacks where people will be impersonating and seeking information. So both internal and external threats, issues when you have weak passwords and all that are likely to expose the data subjects information, personal information to misuse. And then the other category is the data privacy, controlling access by researchers, organizations, anyone comes across it to ensure confidentiality, integrity, and privacy of data subjects. So data protection and assures these are the processes and technologies that are used to protect. In this case, the process and technologies that are used to protect and secure data mechanisms. These can be considered a mechanisms to achieve the goal of continually availability, immutability of the critical data that we in the mental health research. We are evolving, technology is evolving, and therefore renders data highly susceptible to interception, surveillance, corruption, and loss. And therefore, we need, as researchers, to be able to identify appropriate study methods and data processing instruments to ensure organizational and technical measures to ensure that data security is actually protected. How do we ensure data security of the data subjects then in this case? Okay. So we briefly look at how to ensure we protect health data. And this will ensure confidentiality, privacy, and ethical treatment of research participants. The issues to do with the informed consent is very important. Let them consent to the research. The anonymization, conceal their identity so they can also share more, okay, and protect them. And even if unauthorized access, events that we have unauthorized access to personal data, then if it is anonymized, you can use pseudonyms, you can use letters that at least they are not linked to directly to the data subject, so it protects them. The training, as researchers will have research assistants and all that, and we need to, in this health space, sensitive area, then we have to ensure that even the people helping us with data research are actually trained about the existing policies. That means we need to ensure we understand the regulations, we understand the issues, the potential repercussions of not denying the data subjects their rights. So we need to train them on different protocols, the privacy issues, and the best practices to be able to mitigate the risks and ensure compliance. Data minimization, that is also how we can protect health data. Only collect what is required to answer the research objectives. This reduces the possibility of data misuse, the breaches, and minimize the privacy risks. Okay. Issues to do with the storage. Where are you going to collect? You've collected data. Where are you going to store it? So have to look at is it through electronically stored in electronic gadgets? Are they portable? Where are you going to put them? So this will help to prevent the breaches and the loss. Then data encryption. This should be both in transit when you're exchanging the data between researchers, between organization, locally, globally, regionally, and all that, and also when it's just at rest being consumed locally. We have to ensure that it's encrypted. Okay. And then we restrict access to controls. Only even the authorized personnel and based on the roles and responsibilities. So data governance will help us to identify those roles and define the roles and responsibility, and we can now define who accesses what data and for what purposes and why. Data retention policies, very important. researchers, we need to understand if we're working attached to projects, then we need to have data retention period, because the laws will require a specific period of retaining particular sensitive data or personal data. Monitoring and auditing, cannot overemphasize that, so we can be able to identify any gaps in data collection, data processing, and be able to ensure that we are compliant with the data protection regulations. Guidelines, and how do we do this then? When we talk about guidelines for, we talk about guidelines for ensuring data sharing. And in this case, efficient sharing personal data is growingly being needed by funders. You realize that World Health Organization, the new policy requires that data has to be shared. The National Institute of Health, Wellcome Trust, Belinda and Melinda Gates, those are just examples. High impact journals I recently submitted an article and they were actually asking for data availability. I think previously I had not seen that in some other cases. So that is very important in mental health research. So, there's a Research Council of the United Kingdom says that publicly funded research data is a public good, produced in public interest, should be available with restrictions as possible in a timely and responsible manner. How do we navigate data sharing requirements? This data sharing requirement while ensuring the protection of personal data? That's a key question, right? So we look at the data sharing, the guidelines for data sharing as stipulated in the General Data Protection Regulations. So before we even share the data, and then you have to issue, there are questions of legitimacy. First of all, you have to ask yourself, why are we sharing this data? Is it lawful? Is it anchored on existing? Does the existing regulations controlling or upon which the research is actually anchored on allow the sharing of that data? Is that data supposed to be shared in the first place? Did you obtain the consent? What is the aim? Are you justified? What and how much data do we want to share? With whom are we sharing? Is data sharing proportionate, right? Those are the key questions that we look upon when you're sharing data, the issues to do with the legitimacy. The right to share the information, as a researcher, have to ask yourself, which organization, and different organization, of course, will hold different powers. Maybe it is a funder or, and then also have to ask issues of, consider issues of data nature, the confidentiality. Can we share? To what extent can we share some confidential data? Sometimes it will be like a legal requirement, maybe in the interest of data subject to protect them. But so it has to be, there are regulations that have to look at, define, understand what data we're sharing. Then you also have to look at the benefits versus the risk of sharing the data. Very important when you're sharing data. So, and also of not sharing or not sharing that data. High risk to the rights and the freedoms of data subjects. So data protection of, or also data protection or privacy impact assessment will be required in such a case to be able to, to determine what are the benefits and the risk of sharing that particular data. Consider where the data transfer is between, or is it outside one's country or jurisdiction. For example, the European Economic Area, is transfer covered by adequacy decisions that safeguards individuals' rights and freedoms? That's a key question you need to ask when you're sharing data. Then what to do if there is no adequacy for decision for you to transfer the data? Do other safeguards, e.g. the binding organization rules, govern the transfer? Those are key questions you need to ask ourselves. Then do we have any particular exceptions covering the data transfer if no adequacy in decision and no appropriate safeguards, e.g. a contract with the individual or public interest legal requirement? Very important question. Finally, on guidelines for data sharing, develop data sharing protocols, very important, and agreements. If it's research institution, different collaborating different cities, then you need to have a data sharing agreement and what to share, how much are you sharing, the frequency, the purpose, the security, inscription, how is it going to be ensured, the deletion, the retention period, all need to be stipulated. Then keep up to date data, and accurate has to be up to date. And how to ensure this, whose responsibility will that be? How do we ensure that data subjects access the data and the retention period? And what about the deletion processes to ensure privacy, confidentiality, integrity of data subjects? Why do we protect data? There's the issues of data accuracy and reliability. Yeah, just to make sure that the data that is available, it is accurate, is up to date, and can be relayed to make decisions. Protection of personal information to safeguard them from potential risks or consequences, stigmatization, loss of jobs, benefits related to that, social isolation. Preserving individual autonomy, it's a very fundamental right, and you see that it's existing in the existing legal frameworks locally and globally. Then the issues to do with trust and confidence, when they know that their data is actually will be safe and will be protected, and then can be vulnerable and share more to help inform decisions. The regulatory and legal compliance to ensure that we have to protect the data subjects' personal information to ensure that we are compliant to the existing regulations. It is also an ethical protection. Data is for you to actually protect data participants' personal information. Data-driven innovation, we protect it. Actually, it can drive innovation. Come up with technologies can be able to help benefit not only the data subjects but also the others in the same space. Use of data for public benefit and social good. So we protect it for the local and global local and global good in mental health research. Finally, we look at the principles, or briefly look at the principles of data protection, and these ones are anchored from the data protection, General Data Protection Regulation, Article 5. We have different countries, we see that, specifics that have different acts for data protection, and including like in Kenya, the Constitution of Kenya is also part of, provides a right to privacy, and also in different other countries. So one of the principles looking at it requires that data subjects, as research, we have to ensure that the data is actually processed lawfully, fairly, and in a transparent manner. We also have to make sure that purposive limitation, data is only collected for specific purposes, and are the data subjects aware that you're collecting that particular data? Are they consented to that? Data minimization, again, it has to be adequate, it has to be relevant and very necessary for you to collect that particular data. Accuracy issues, complete, correct, and should be up to date. The storage retention periods have to be defined, and integrity and confidentiality. Then the security mechanisms, different security mechanisms had to be put in place to ensure that data is actually protected. Accountability, we have to ensure compliance to the existing principles and regulations, know what they are, and so you are able to implement them. So briefly look at the data privacy laws and regulations. And these are about collection, use, and sharing of personal information to third parties without notice or consent. And the data privacy laws and regulations vary from one country to another. And we see that 137 out of 197 countries on the globally has data privacy and legislations. In Africa and Asia, only have 61%, 57% of countries. That was as at 2020 when I got this information, having adopted such legislations. So in least developed countries, we only have 48% of the that have actually the legislations for data protection. The link there at your time to share this material will take you to an interactive map where you see that some countries that have these legislations in place. So some of the key regulations with significant implications for data privacy, protection and privacy, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that was in 1948, started way back. So the Article 12, and I quote, "No one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with privacy, family, home, or correspondence, nor to attacks upon his honor and reputation. Everyone has the right to the protection of the law against such interference or attacks." Okay, that's one important regulation that has a global consequences in terms of data privacy and data privacy. Then the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, also key. Its council adopted the guidelines on trans-border data flows and the protection of privacy and recommended them to the OECD member countries. The other ones are actually the very key one and very recent one, and the General Data Protection Regulation. And, basically, of course, it is protects the European Union citizen and personal data and privacy. But of course, the real data is global in nature, and due to its extraterritorial applicability, and then it has an implication on an organization, processors, and all of us that are dealing with research. processing any European Union residents' personal data. And so we have to ensure compliance regardless of. And then the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. It is a US federal law that safeguards privacy and security of patients. That is the medical information, but also has global implications. Consumer Privacy Act, which protects the privacy.
Hello, Lillian.
Business obligations around collection and yes, time.
Yeah, no, it's not time. I think there's a problem with the network. So, yes, I can hear you, but we lost you a few minutes ago. So probably maybe you can switch off your video. I think it will improve.
Okay. Is my video on?
Yeah.
Fine, then let me stop sharing. Then I switch off. Sorry for that. Okay. Fine. Let me just. So can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see.
Okay. So we are winding up on the data privacy laws and regulations before we come to live data cycle. So, and for the Africans' data privacy laws and regulation ecosystems, this is actually underdeveloped or desperate. We still have very few countries that have data privacy and regulations, okay? And for African, for data privacy and all that, we actually influenced by international frameworks, particularly the General Data Protection Regulation. And of course, it requires that the data controllers and data processors, as researchers, all of us, we need to require to ensure stringent standards to protect the personal data that we are handling, okay? So on the continent, some of the frameworks at the continental level and regional levels, we have the African Union Convention on Cybersecurity and Personal Data Protection, but there are some debates around it because up to date is not yet been effected or consented upon by the other countries. Just a few, about 15 out of 55 countries, okay? The Malabo, it's also known as the Malabo Convention. The SADC Model Law and Data Protection, also, we have the ECOWAS Supplementary Act, and we have the East Africa Framework for cyber laws. Then on the continent, yes, I've mentioned that only about 29 out of 55 countries have data privacy and data protection and privacy regulations. That is by July 2020. And in this case, a highlight of this one is country level data privacy laws and regulations landscape. Countries with legislations, for example, just to name a few, we have Kenya, and starting with the Constitution of Kenya 2010 has defines privacy as a fundamental right. Then we also have Data Protection Act 2019. South Africa has also Protection of Personal Information Act 2013. Other countries that have legislations, the Uganda, Angola, and then most of West Africa countries. The countries that have no specific data law includes Tanzania, Malawi, Zambia, and Zimbabwe, not limited though. And then we have countries that have no any data privacy laws and regulations, but the constitution guarantee of privacy. These are Ethiopia, Namibia, Sierra Leone, and also Gambia falls in that category. Then countries with the data protection laws present, no any data protection laws present. South Sudan and Somalia, DRC Congo, Sudan, and Mozambique falls in that category. Please note that the data privacy laws and regulations ensure that, ensures and enforces the strict guidelines of data lifecycle, collecting, use, processing, deletion, and all that, sharing and storage throughout, And then they also establish different offices like the Data Protection Commission officer who ensures that the regulations are actually researchers, institutions, all comply to the existing regulations. And of course, in this case, the issues of penalties and when they come in place where there is no compliance to this. So reflections on the question, then this we can discuss, we can think about it maybe. How will a researcher institution collecting data through digital intake forms ensure the data collection practices align with both local and international regulations? We can reflect about that. We can discuss it later. And assuming assuming that you have personal data on a group of women who are part of your research that ended in 2010. The personal data is stored in a pseudonymized manner. You wish to conduct a follow-up study with these women in the future. Can you continue to hold on this personal data? That's something that we can also reflect about. So thank you very much. We'll interact later. Let me invite my colleague.